Okay, I think we are ready to go. Everything is in place, just as planned. Now, why the villainous laugh? It's because when you're writing a story or a campaign for your Dungeons and Dragons or other role-playing game, you gotta know what your villain is doing. Because the villain is the star of the show, as weird as it sounds. The villain is what is driving your story. Otherwise, if there's no conflict, if there's no point to the journey, to the banter, if there's no point to all of that, what are we doing? Maybe watching paint dry is fun for some people. Grass growing can probably be very exciting. For many, there needs to be some sort of motion and energy. Not always conflict, but even the threat of conflict on the horizon. You need your audience who's reading your story or your players at your table to be going, oh, whoa, what's this? Because new things have come to light. There is new information. There are new threats. The moments of, I never should have crawled out of bed, or moments of dread, or moments of suspense. And those have to happen because something else is happening against the character, as a played character or as a written character. Because if you're the author of a story, you're playing everyone. At least as a DM, you have the luxury of letting other people make those sort of decisions, and you can gauge their reactions. And you leave that to be a more organic experience for the player. Either as the player, or the player filtering thoughts and feelings through this manifestation in the world. But while the story follows the adventure of the hero, the development of the hero, the banter among the party members, the narrative, the underpinning or the overarching or whatever, the solid core is all about your villain. And this is why we created our villain first in this workshop series. And this is why your villain is very important. Because even if the villain as a character might actually die or exit stage right very early in your story, the machinations put into place are still perpetuating. And it's still a race against time, or it's, you got to cut the fuse before it burns down to the powder keg kind of a thing. So the villain's dying breath might have been to light the fuse. There's still a situation brought on by the villain, and all the circumstances the villain went through in order to get the powder keg and the fuse and the match, and to have a fight to light it. And then while the villain's gone, there's at least this one last gasp that the heroes must act against. And so overall, what is the concept of your story? Now, if we take a look at what we might not have Celtic Lady in chat anymore. Celtic Lady actually did a very excellent adventure, or an excellent job of planning the adventure in her story. So here, this isn't just a line. This has some girth to it, all right? And it's red. Ooh, red, the evil color. Ooh. Bad guy stuff, everyone. While Celtic Lady's campaign is focusing on the trials and tribulations of her players, the story is about a proto-god doing things until it becomes a full god. That might not be as readable. I have to learn to write in a larger font. I'm sorry. But we have proto-god becomes a full god. That's it. We reduce it down. That is the most basic point of the story. We know the direction everything is going with the villain. Because the villain has already set things in motion, has contacts, has resources, or has no one knowledgeable about his or her actions. So has, you know, a clandestine cover. Everything's already in place. Even in Vampire the Masquerade, I know I keep talking a lot about D&D. And for us, especially here, this is the medium through which, or maybe it's like, it's the hub world. It's the lobby. We all gather in the D&D lobby. We load into the hub world of D&D. But we can take these concepts in other directions. If you're writing a chronicle, and you want the story to be the story about a prince who falls. Okay, cool. There's your concept. We have prince, and this can be from the creation of the prince. This could be from the birth of the human that would become the prince 200 years later. And then the story that it's immediately picked up is another 200 years after that. But ultimately, that chronicle is the story of the villain through which the coterie is acting. And as the writer of this chronicle, of this novel, of this campaign, whatever it is, you have a person, or whatever, the villainous organization, whatever, the entity is on a pretty singular path. Now, there could be ups and downs, of course. A setback or something, or, you know, things that happen along the way. It's good to be knowledgeable about. It's not, you know, the straight and narrow, especially if we're talking about the big bad evil guy. Woo! Jackson was a great example, says Coffee. Which, by the way, Coffee Cat is a storyteller in Vampire the Masquerade. And you can catch Coffee's current chronicle Wednesday nights over on Coffee Cat Presents here on Twitch. But you know everything that the villain does in order to achieve this, because this is now a list. And you can break it step by step to attain full godhood. Let's see, I believe Celtic Lady mentioned something about passing through gates. So we know that along the lines, pass gates. And we know somewhere along the line that there is going to be, there might be a guardian that even the villain has to throw down. And so we have kill guard. And even before this, there's probably plotting and learning that goes on. Learn of gates. Okay? So far, so good. What happens before that? Maybe there is something like humbled as Proto. So this is someone with power, but not enough as a god. Tried once and failed. By the way, if we can fill this out, if we go to the very end goal, what is it that the villain wants? And all we have to do is ask ourselves why. And you might have seen this in a prior broadcast. Why will continue to take us back in time all the way to this point. challenged gods. Conquered humans. Now, what do we have? As the author, DM, ST, GM, whatever you want to put after your name, we have a proto-god. This could go back further if you want. Again, if you're talking about the prince of a city in Vampire, go back to the birth of the human. If you want. So we have a proto-god who conquered humans due to its superhuman power. Probably was full of hubris, challenged the gods, and was humiliated for it. Brooding, angry, maybe even disabled in some way from the fight. The proto-god learns of another way. The gates. You know, it doesn't have to fight the gods. It could just get in through the gates if it can only do that. It can attain the power. There's a guard that it must kill. It passes through the gates, and then it becomes a full god despite everything. This is itself a story. Now, the heroes may not become intimately familiar with all of this, okay? And in fact, the heroes are probably not even involved. This could end up being a 2-year-long campaign. Or a book that, it's a two-parter, right? You write the original and then the sequel to wrap it up. The story, or the narrative, the narrative, may not start until this point. Story begins. Now, this was important. Even just this list of single events. Even though you're only writing about this stuff right here, your story is going to begin here. Because you need this as a margin that exists to find a place in the world. To draw a line in the sand, you need a desert. You need the rest of the sandbox, you need the rest of the Sahara surrounding you, so that you can draw your line in the sand and say, this is mine. And I'm going to build something here, or I'm going to die here, or I'm going to draw help here, or whatever. But everything else has to exist to be a margin around your story. Because there always needs to be something in the periphery. It doesn't have to be actively noted, but just as we do in real life. I'm looking you all straight in the eyes, okay? Eye contact with the camera. And yet, I can hear if Awe is banging around in the rafters. If a spider comes down right about here. I don't know if this is showing up on camera because I'm not looking up. I can see if a spider drops down right here. I can hear if someone goes zooming down the road or police sirens. There's a lot of other stuff that while I'm talking to you here in the store through Twitch, also, hi, YouTube, or wherever else, Rumble, something in the future. We are here, and there's a world around me. And I need the rest of the world around me to make sure that I am here. I need to be in a place. This place can't exist without everything else existing around it. Or I have no place. Your story will have no place if there isn't this periphery. Hello, future OnlyFans. I don't know. Y'all keep prompting me to go over there, Tio, and I mean, I don't know if I have what it takes to be on OnlyFans, but I have some minis that might earn a good living on that site. And my goodness, we are being raided by none other than Insomnia Night RPG. Only minis? So, Disfamous, maybe that's what I start for all of the variant Kickstarter models. Because they keep talking about it, right? There's a lot of cool models people put out there, but the stretch goals are... there's less model. There's less model there. And so maybe that's what the 18 plus part of the web store becomes, you know? Hi, Darth Valis. Insomnia Night coming in strong with a Maddie. Junior the Nerd, or JR if you prefer. JR the Nerd in with a raid. First time chat, as well as Dizzy B with a raid. Everyone, welcome to the Hero Zone. Dat Boy Nate in with some hype. Yes, welcome Raiders, everyone. We are here after hours on a very cold and somewhat snowy night in Ohio. And you have walked into the workshop where we are discussing creating your story as a DM, an ST, a GM, or as an author of a story. And why, while the story follows the actions of the heroes, it's actually about your villain. Your villain's actions. You should always be aware of what is going on with the villain as the driving force of your story. Now, are there other books that don't follow this model? Yes, of course. This is not an absolute, the only way to write. You are literally not an author if you write any other way. But you can see that we just plotted out. We know what's going on with the villain and why the villain is doing everything the villain is doing. But the story is going to begin after all of this has already taken place. Everything we write as an author or as a campaign running DM. This is your session 0, or this is the first page of your narrative. Now, you might address a couple things going back here, but you need a wide margin and some history before that can come up and visit later. But your entire novel, to keep it thematic to NaNoWriMo, your entire novel might just be this part. Because all of this is wonderful innocence and, you know, no real power. All the while, the villain kills this guard. And after doing so, then needs to somehow pass through the gates. But there could be some other things the villain must do. And that's going to, you know, entangle the heroes. Finally, you know, the race is on to the very end to try and stop the villain. And this is where we come into, you know, the narrative arcs. Because our story is going to on a smaller scale, this is what our story is going to look like. As each of these, if we want to blow it up, have a sense of rising action, of accumulated knowledge, of a building of tension in some way, a break, something happens. This is either an epic boss fight, or this is after a tense scouring of an abandoned village. A cat jumps out of the rafters of a hut with a boom and a crack. But the tension drops. No Straw, thank you very much for the follow. Welcome to the Hero Zone. This is both your final epic battle on the volcano with the dragons in the air and it's storming and there's lightning and whatever. At the end of the game, this is also exploring the village, learning a couple clues. Nothing's happened. Crack-a-boom! And a cat meow jumps down from the rafters and runs off, and everyone goes, and then the cycle begins again. But here you can see that especially if you're writing, you have ultimate freedom and you don't have players to defy your best intentions at the story. Those players, ugh, if only we could play D&D without players, right? Am I right, fellow DMs? Come on. Right? A plan is a list of things that can go wrong. But here, as an author, we are fully in control. And we know where we want our players to be, how we want to have tensions rise and fall as the narrative continues and we reach plot points. As we reach plot points. And last night, this is a little bit of a review from last night because I did an impromptu short workshop. Players do help you write more character-driven. Oh, no, I agree. I was being purely sarcastic, JR. I promise. So, someone had come into chat. By the way, I revealed the final, the great plan of the 4-year-long broadcast campaign that we had here on the channel. Coffee Cat being one of the players in those 4 years. This was it, the master stroke from someone who preaches about D&D and stories and everything, right? This was building and building and building for years. And what was my final arc? Meet someone, kill a guard, fight a boss, and then kill the BBEG. That was it. That was the culmination of years of planning. Now, there are some more details. I mean, you can see there's a little bit of a roller coaster ride that everyone went on. But to build the tension, right, there's the points, but to build the tension, there were some things that happened along the way. Getting used to a new normal after coming back from Oiho. Preparing, in a sense, to kill the guard through knowledge and accumulation of power and things. Doing that, preparing for the final encounter, and then having the final encounter. Now, if you're curious as to why the final encounter was actually a low point, it was actually a high point, just not necessarily high in tension. Because the smiles on everyone's face and the fact that they got to breathe easy, it was a rockin' good time. That was probably the second most fun and badass boss battle that I have ever run. And it was no less fun or intense, even though it was a break moment. And someone had asked about, well, for my players, like, how do you do this without railroading them? And even as an author, this is something to consider. As the DM, as the author, you are fishing on the SS plot. You have a plot point. That's you. You cast the hook, the story hook out, and you hope that your players... Now, again, we're talking kind of on parallel storytelling. You know, improvisation, live action, you're with friends, 4 other people making decisions, not you. But the concept is, they bite the hook, And then all you need to do, if you don't want to railroad them, you know they're going to get to the plot point. However, you let them run with it a little bit. Tire them out. Let them think that, that they, maybe they're in control. And we could discuss things like the Quantum Ogre or, different layers of that. But ultimately, this is, they even know. I mean, the fish feels the hook in its mouth. That's not natural. Something's going to happen. The fish probably knows this. This is uncomfortable. There's going to be an end to this one way or the other. However, in the meantime, there's fight and sport, and the fish might wiggle and wiggle, but look, it's always working to get closer to the plot. And congratulations, you reach the plot point, and now you move on to the next one. You bag your fish, you cast your hook, you let them wiggle, you tire them out, and you pull them into the next plot point. And the story advances. And the story advances and the story advances until finally you have a cooler full of awesome things that have happened along the way. Now, backing up this sentiment, if you don't believe just some random guy, at least here live now on Twitch, wherever you're seeing me, now and into the future, let me share a couple resources with you. You can write the overarching story in a 3-act structure. Tried and true, bread and butter. And you will get the same structure, giving you so many unique stories that maybe on the surface, unless you really dig, you don't know and you don't care that it follows the 3-act structure. Act 1 is the setup. Act 2 is confrontation. Act 3 is resolution. We have our beginning, our inciting incident, maybe some second thoughts. We have the climax of Act 1. We have some obstacles for the ascending action. We have the midpoint. Maybe there's a big twist. They found out the whole time that blah, blah. Obstacle, disaster, crisis, building the confrontation until we get to the climax of Act 2, which is going to bring about shortly thereafter the climax of Act 3, and then the descending action, the cooldown, the aftercare. If you would like another look at this as well, you don't believe me, or you want something that you can just have open in a tab and reference later, and of course there's other sites. Like, I'm not saying that these are the epitome, but these are ones that I can show off and explain to you, especially in this format. This is going to go over the narrative arc. It'll go over exposition, rising action, climax, falling action, resolution. We had looked at that, right? And you're going to get a lot more definitions with this. There's different types of narrative arcs, just like we talked about archetypes of characters in a prior. What type of a story are you running? A rags to riches, overcoming the monster, the quest, voyage and return? Again, there's no shame in using these as an underpinning, because ultimately it's still going to be your story. Is someone going to be upset like, oh, you wrote a comedy? I already saw a comedy. I'm done. I know what comedy's all about. Heck no. Make it your comedy. How many different comedians can you enjoy? How many different comedians can offer the same exact joke, The Aristocrats, and deliver it completely differently and get a laugh out of you every single time? Hi, Keys. Good to see you. Though, if you have a knowledge of these generalities, if you have a knowledge of general templates to follow, that can empower you to go on to create unique things. If you watch birds, you probably know the basic structure of birds like every other bird watcher. However, you may actually go on with that unique knowledge and find a new species of bird. Just like you can find the cool niche to hit or to fill with your story that might be, you know, bounded into a rebirth. I guess shilling again for Coffee Cat. I don't know if Coffee's still hanging out. Which is Rebirth, a D&D tale. That's on Thursdays on Coffee Cat's channel. The main character experiences an event that makes them a better person. Example, A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. So make make the foundation, make the concept about rebirth, and still follow the narrative arc, the 3-act structure, but it's still going to be your story. And you're still going to need to know what the villain has done so far, what the villain is doing meanwhile, that you may not actively talk about, but as the heroes chase after the villain, they're going to discover more and more as these bigger villain events happen. This is the countdown, the timer, the pressure, the impetus. Not the little blue pill thing that is treated. Impetus. The impetus of your story. Because I want you to have a potent story. Now, in what we have made... Hi, Noctis. Yeah, Craigar, the joke... It's a doozy. That being said, if any of you look it up, if you don't know what I'm talking about, you might exit the PG-13 boundary. So we will talk about things and use context here, but just as a heads up, the Aristocrats has the possibility of going outside the normal conversational bounds that we practice. Now, our villain... she needed to win a contest. Oh, I recommend the band named after the joke. Very incredible instrumentalists, says Craigar. Sierra says the Aristocrats is designated to be an NC-17 joke. There you go. So you all know out there. That joke can get a little spicy, okay? If you don't like a spicy meatball, you know, like what E.T.'s munching on right now, then yeah. So, our villain in our novel, as we designed her, we know that she's a paladin, an Oath of the Ancients. She has to win a contest to take over an order. And the way that she developed was completely just, it writes itself. And hello, we are being rated by Macabre Derek, coming in strong with 16. Welcome, Raiders. Yes, welcome Derek's Mosh Pit. No Straw says, what are some tropes that should be avoided when writing a compelling campaign? You don't have to avoid tropes necessarily, No Straw. If you rely... so how about this? If you rely on tropes, that's lazy. And so the trope itself is carrying your story. If you reference a trope, or you write something that coincides with one, that does not necessarily detract from your story. And it's okay to lean into that. Yeah, tropes are tropes for a reason. They work. But if you rely on them, it's this. You're writing your story, and at the very end, on the last page of your book, it says it was all a dream. Okay? Why did I just waste my time reading what you wrote? Was that supposed to compel me to think of something, to do something? Because you just threw away everything that you did, effectively. That's a trope, of course. You know, can you trust dreams? Ooh! And you can like super hone in on one, and it becomes really edgy. Oh, we can't trust anyone in society. Wake me up inside. You know, wake my trust up. Dreams, they mean nothing. You know, so they can be completely overdone and be tacky. But that's where the tropes are taking over your writing. If you want the classic distraction, right? The woman in red is a distraction. Now, whether or not it is a woman or wearing red, we have the concept that there's a distraction caused by someone who just walks past. It could be the king in yellow that walks past. It's still a trope to have someone's attention diverted by a distraction. That's how, you know, pickpockets work and certain con men work. It's just how nature works. If we see something deviant outside of what we're used to, you're walking down a city block, it's lunchtime. There's 200 people on the sidewalk and they're all wearing gray business suits. And someone walks by you in a red cocktail dress. You are most likely going to notice that cocktail dress. Even if you own the same cocktail dress and you go, yeah, it's actually comfortable. You know, bought it a while ago. I'm used to seeing it in my closet or when I go out or whatever. But in that moment, amid a sea of gray felt business suits or whatever, you have the person in red walk by. That is a trope. You can use that. It does work. But if everything, you know, if you put so much focus on it, that the trope becomes the impetus of your story, that's where your story is going to be weak. Think of tropes like going bumper bowling. You can lay them down in the gutters, and they'll help keep the ball of your story rolling. But there's a problem if your ball like collides into one and doesn't move or breaks it, right? Emperor in New Clothes. If you haven't read The King in Yellow, I recommend it. Very classic pre-Lovecraftian horror that he referenced. Yep. It was adopted into it. You know, do you want to tell the story of what really happened in Fair Carcosa? You can do that. Yep, so Nostra, it's fine. It is absolutely okay to do. But if you lean into it, it becomes kind of lame and campy. If you put a red herring in your story, a red herring can work pretty well one time. If you rely on the red herring to artificially create mystery, it becomes tiresome, pedantic, boring, and predictive. From what I understand, there's a TV show that came out recently that's like that. I don't know. Must be my imagination. So, you can have the ditzy blonde Nostra, but you have to do something with the ditzy blonde. Otherwise, it just sits there. It does nothing. Or if you lean into it way too much, it becomes so ruinous. And there's no real exact answer because every story is going to be different. Some stories need more ditzy blondes. Some need absolutely none. And if one were to show up, the entire story is ruined. And so it's really just a matter of what you are doing with the concept. Just like we talked about. What are you doing with the 3-act structure? What are you doing with the concept of a comedy? What are you doing with the trope of the shy nerd? Sierra says Buffy the Vampire Slayer did a good turn on the ditzy blonde trope by having her turn into a badass vampire slayer. Sure, the title gives it away a bit, but yeah. And in that case too, don't be obvious with it. If you're out there going like, "Oh, this is so subversive. I'm subversing things. This is subversive." You're telling, not showing. Through all of this, you don't need to tell the exact excruciating detail of why the villain went through all of this to get to the start of the story. You can show it. And that is going to be the difference between great writing and good writing and poor writing. Is show, don't tell. The things you don't say can still world build, or still offer prompts or possibilities. And in that regard, you are showing what's happening in the story, because we are here to be entertained and to be put in the position of the heroes to follow along the impetus of your villain. Because the story's about your villain, we just happen to be along for the ride in the vehicle, in the medium of the hero or the party or whatever, if it's a tabletop role-playing game or the book. Because they're the ones who are transferring information to our brains. Because we don't have eyes and ears on the ground in fantasy world. And it's okay to leave some loose ends or whatever. Show, don't tell. There's a lot of telling going on in entertainment. And a lot of entertainment, in my opinion, has suffered for it. If you know what's going on in your world, and you can answer why has the villain done everything? Remember, the villain started out with, we have the concept of a proto-god, and the goal is to become a full god. That's it. That is the purpose of the story. We can write a 10-novel series, and the purpose of the story is for the villain to become a full god. That's the line that runs through it all. And then we ask ourselves the questions. What were the steps? We know how it's going to, well, how it's going to end for the villain, or how the villain wants it to end anyway. You know, usually the heroes step in. That's cool. All right, well, why is the proto-god going to become a full god? The proto-god passed through the gates. Why? The proto-god killed the guard. Why? The proto-god learned of the gates. Why? Because the proto-god was humbled. Why? Because the proto-god challenged the gods. Why? Because the proto-god conquered the humans and wanted to move on. Why? Because the proto-god existed and was more powerful than the weak humans. That's it. It's as simple as that. Your villain, you can write a compelling villain and put in moral conundrums and all that. That's fine. But you need this straight through, or a semblance of it. Because all of this has to happen before we can have some, whatever classic. We'll lead into the trope. You got I use this all the time. The farmer's kid, right? Wakes up scrappy one day, and goblins have attacked the village. Now, that's more in a D&D thing, right? Goes into the attic of the thatched roof cottage and finds his dad's old town guard sword and old dusty armor, and goes out and helps drive off the goblins. Then they go and chase the goblins back to the cave. Then they learn more in the cave. Then they go to the capital city, and they're entrusted with more, and they go on from there. Then they learn there's a great big goblin army outside of the county. And then they go find out that there's not even just goblins, but hobgoblins and other goblinoid. You see how the tension? I just rattled this off, and we just went from being some sleepy, yokel with, of course, we're an adventurer, so one or both of our parents are gone. Our dad must have died in something, left his sword and armor to us, but it was always put away in the attic, and we never did it. And then, we hit a break point, come down, and this break point, again, this is both your big bad evil guy final confrontation to win the day and save the world. This is also the 3 goblins that were found sneaking in your farming village were driven off because you made a spooky sound with and waved a torch at them. But after they ran away, okay, we process that, we have new knowledge, and the action can rise again and go to the next step. And so we follow along. But we need to know our villain in this example again. From what we have written before in the workshop, and I was referencing in Vampire the Masquerade as well, you can absolutely do this if you have a corrupt prince. Now look, you want to talk about a trope? Everyone guns for the prince. Because apparently every city's prince is a big, whatever. And always manages to F stuff up and, that's the trope, but we have so much fun with it because it also works. And so how is your prince going to downfall? Or how is your prince going to do whatever, right? If the prince is your villain and the story begins, whatever, I got more paper. We know that at some point in time, our vampire prince was born as a human. And we know at some other point in time, what's a trope? The prince is going to conquer the neighboring city. This is it. The whole chronicle is about the prince and what the prince is doing. Our vehicle is the coterie, who are the stars of the show. Don't get me wrong. The spotlight is absolutely on the players and on their characters. But the impetus for the story, and by the way, the prince was born in 1555. I don't know. It's a long time ago. And this is going to take place in 2023. Your story, maybe you're designing a vampire comic, you're writing a vampire novel, you want to plot a chronicle. Do you know where this game most likely is going to begin? There. This is all there's your 3-act structure. even if you wanted to use that. And then we can put the midpoint of the big revelation. This is 2 years of playing at your tabletop. It's a full novel. It's a comic series. It's whatever. But you need this because at some point in time, this person grew up, or I don't know, it's a child prince, embraced when they were 10 for whatever reason. Emergency ration went wrong. You know, blood spilled, and the kid that was being used as a resource ended up getting vampire blood and turning. Grew up. Embraced. Neonate. Ancilla. Boy, Derek or Coffee or someone, if I'm forgetting steps, y'all are gonna... I know we have fledgling, I'm sorry. It should be fledgling, neonate, Ancilla. Forgive me. Right? And maybe Ancilla, that's it. Or elder. Now, if we're talking a couple hundred years old, then we're definitely an elder. So we become an elder. All this time, what have we done? If we've made it this far, can you imagine the contacts and or wealth and or survival instinct and or whatever that has built this entire time? And this person isn't even prince yet, even as an elder. Maybe at some point in time, maybe after being an Ancilla, there might be a promotion, if this is a cam game, into a whip on the court, a scourge on the court. You know, kind of notable, but, you know, you're not the big swinging Dracula, okay? But at some point we are prince. And we have other full arcs of trying to establish our rule in all of this. And at some point in time here, we need to grow because we're bored. It's a personality flaw from all of this other stuff that we imagined when we were human that got locked into us as a vampire and exacerbated because of the vitae, because of the curse. And so you might want to do something new, or there might be something compelling. You might be after a magical artifact. You might be after an antediluvian. You might just be after pure raw power and money. That's it. But of course you are imposing yourself as prince on another city. You're going to lay a claim on it, and those vampires are going to have to answer to you, etc., etc., etc. Classic prince is the bad guy the whole time trope. And yet we have made this, we can make this unique. I never mentioned, all of you out there, maybe some of you are going, oh yeah, so this is the story of Aventru. Why? This is the story of a Nosferatu. What are you thinking about? This is absolutely a Nosferatu story. A Ventrue story? Get out of here with that. What is this, a trope? Gotcha. Centaurus says Malkavian. All right. That makes sense the whole time. The whole time. So we used, you know, here in the game, in the comic, in the book, in the module you're writing, in whatever, this is a year of play. This is a 360-page novel that follows the traditional 3-act structure, and it is built on the trope of a prince that overreaches. And yet it's your story with your details, and you can write about it confidently because you know why things are happening. You have a compelling villain, and a villain that is using everything to this point to carry the momentum forward. Because let's say that the prince actually is destroyed right here. What machinations are happening after the prince gets dusted? Because this is still a compelling legacy. It's either a fuse that needs to be snuffed out, or it's a race against a messenger from one city to the next. It is quelling an internal war, a vampiric civil war where all of the primogens are going to start going bonkers to step up and become prince. What happens in a power vacuum? This can lead to an intercity war, even in the same faction of Cam. And that's for your next novel, your next comic book, your next chronicle. And it can follow the same structure because you still have so much stuff that happened back here. Can you imagine the legacy of one vampire just stopping right here? You can run 3 other campaigns, and this thing, the tendrils of this thing just can't stop being found everywhere, and is a villain into the next chronicle despite getting ashed in front of everyone 100 pages in. 20 sessions into your roleplay. And so, again, the villain is your through line. This is the force against which you are going to twist and turn everything happening. You can see this has a lovely bleed through. You know, if it helps, let's look at it this way. You all might think differently. So we start from nothing, and here's our goal. Yay! Big star at the top. The villain is taking a path, a fairly straightforward one. And what are our heroes doing? They start from nothing. Either no wealth, no knowledge, no influence. Even if they're wealthy and influential, in this circumstance, for this, the villain is doing this for the reason that the villain can achieve it. Otherwise, it's not a very good villain. And you should probably have a compelling villain. Because going, lol, I'm crazy. Look, there are almost no villains that are going to wake up in the morning and go, I'm a bad guy and I do bad guy things. Now, come on, you know, splash water in the face. Let's go out and be the best villain we can because we're villains. Or just go out and do a bunch of crazy stuff and expect to get away with it in a long-term situation. Whether it's finding the relic in the ruins. Also, Teshup Iluyanka, thank you very much for the follow. Welcome to the Hero Zone. There's already knowledge. It's the temple where the relic is. It is the location of, you know, some old from the Book of Nod. It is the Archfey. Let's go back to the villain for NaNoWriMo. It is the location of the Archfey that the villain is actually going to strike down. Something that might arguably be actually noble and good for everyone else, because the Fey, if you don't know, the Fey are kind of butts. We'll keep it PG-13. Sierra, thank you very much. And so the villain can even be maybe doing a good thing, but the methodology is what is villainous. Still, yeah, thank you, Fluffy. I need the illustration. I'm not good at drawing them, so you all can produce them here. I can draw a line and I can make kind of a star. That's it, all right? Still, we can have someone who's the son of a noble, has access to near unlimited wealth and everything, but knows nothing about the secret temple, knows nothing about the cult, knows nothing about the location of the book or the power of the book or whatever. We start at nothing. And then we find out through a series of events through the twists and the turns, through the loop-de-loos that might seem like a setback, but actually propel forward. Use natural forces. What do we do with some rockets and other things? We slingshot them around the Earth to send them out. A satellite, a probe, whatever. You know, what did the lunar lander do? Use the moon as a slingshot. Use the gravity to come right back. So in cases like this, if you are doing compelling writing, this is what I tried to do in my D&D game. I hope, by the way, Fluffy Sheep was another player in it. There were times in the story that might have seemed like a setback. I always hoped that the ultimate payoff would have been a boost forward, rocketing them after they resolved that loop around. With knowledge, wealth, advancement in the story, or something else. I'm sure some loops were stronger than others. But it's fine to have setbacks. But if you want to keep the momentum going, it loops around, you lose progress, but then you fly forward. Welcome back, Raven. This is so the story is the Red Tower here. Though the perspective, the adventure, our journey, the Gordian plot, is from the perspective of people who knew nothing and find out more as they continue to wind around this monolithic force of the impetus of your story, which is often your villain. Lethal, hello, welcome back. So you look at it like, horizontal lines. You can look at it as a vertical line. You can look at this as triangles. You can look at this, if we take the hero's journey and we roll it out, we unwrap the hero's journey, which is a cycle, it'll be a line, and you can plot there. And then you can measure on a graph, if this is how your brain works. You can measure the rise and fall of action, the accumulation of knowledge, tension, wealth. And we are being rated by Down to Die D&D. Hunchy, hello. Welcome, Down to Dyers. Raven, thank you for the shout out to our raiders. And I hope things were going well in your D&D game. If it helps you think about this as an author or DM, GM, or ST, then if you love fishing, imagine this same concept, this same concept, this same concept, this same concept. You go, you know what? I like fishing, and it's easy for me to conceptualize reeling in the action to the plot point, letting the fish go and wiggle and move, because you know it can only act in the bounds of the line that's holding it, but yet it's gonna make it to the plot point. ST is storyteller. That is the term for the storyteller in World of Darkness games, and maybe some others, but at least in the World of Darkness games. Welcome back, Hero Dragon. And by the way, this is just as much a comedy as a tragedy. This is a voyage and return. This is the quest. This is rags to riches. Any of the others. But at the end of the day, this is your story. And I want to encourage you to write and get your ideas out there. If you need to sit down and make silly little fisherman sketches to collect your ideas, if you need to make graphs, if you need to just make a bunch of midpoints where you know the beginning of your story, the end, you fill in the exact half in between with one event, and then you go between this major event and the ending, what's the midpoint major event, and you do it over and over and over again until you've plotted out your entire narrative arc, you can do that too. You want to take it in 3D, conceptualize the rise and fall, it's all there for you. There are suggestions, there are some standardizations, there are great beginning points, but ultimately you think differently than other people, and you got to do what you got to do. If you're frustrated with writing traditionally, then don't write traditionally. Write a bunch of notes, throw them into a hat, and challenge yourself to link them together. Pull them out randomly, because maybe you think best with improv. And you need the challenge of being put under pressure, because that gets your brain juices flowing. Others out there, maybe you have a programming brain, and you are absolutely fine with lines of text, and you will hyperlink your own, in-world lore and everything to each other, and you create an entire database for your novel. Do it. If that's how you think and that's the best way that you organize, or you do a fusion, you get a bunch of sticky notes and you lay them out and you go, I don't like this sticky note here. Let's move this plot point here. You know what? That makes a lot more sense. You explain this very well. You've got me thinking how many ways this story can go. And myself and others, No Straw, will be happy to help you continue that. If not here in the workshops, then we also, on our Discord, if you use it, we have a mentor network, and there are writing mentors who would be happy to help you out if you come up with writer's block. Artist mentors, virtual tabletop mentors, role-playing mentors. If you need help building a character or balancing an encounter or something, such as that concept exists. But we can all go back to the same understanding of there are thematic elements, universal elements that we can use to write. There are tools that we can use. Not every story needs every tool. And throughout this process, as the presenter, and I know you're called a storyteller, please. Show, don't tell. You can tell, and sometimes it is appropriate to tell. But it's a lot more compelling to show. Show there's thoughtfulness. Show that there are events that extend beyond, that are on the margins of what is happening. You show that there's a greater world out there. Because if you have to tell someone something, it's either not obvious or you don't trust your audience. And, I mean, insulting your audience is not usually a way to go, despite arguably some modern entertainment outlets doing this. But show. Because if you tell, we disengage our imaginations. You just tell it how it is and we go, oh, okay. Well, I don't need to think anymore. And if you're turning off the brains of your audience, of your readers, of your players, or if you're broadcasting a game of your viewers, you're going to find that they're going to want to do other things. Or they're not going to pay attention. Or they're not going to be as invested. Or they might have given your first book a try, but they don't want your second book. Because you just told them a bunch of stuff that goes on. Well, I could do that in life. I could tell people a bunch of things. And not everyone wants to be told things either, you know? Challenge me. Let me imagine. Let me figure things out. Because there can always be more. You know, in a live action setting like that, Coffee, it is such a tough balance. And you just have to know when to hold them and know when to fold them. Because sometimes if you go, there's a knock at the door and Rick shouts angrily through it. Okay. You told us there's a knock at the door. I can imagine that. And you also revealed who's behind the door. Even logically because of the voice of the shout. Instead, if you wanted to show that it's more drawn out. Sometimes there's time constraints or due to the pacing, deliberate or not. But instead, you could just go... Hey, pukehead! Open up! Now, in the context, everyone knows only Rick calls people pukeheads. But you use the accent, you use the tone of your voice. And we heard a knock, but that immerses us into the situation. So I can tell you there's a knock at the door and it's Rick. Or, hey, pukeheads, open up! I can show you that there's a knock at the door and that it's Rick. So, again, in a live presentation with friends or through a broadcast, there's times where it is for a necessity, you tell, because communication needs to be clear or you need to create urgency, and you want to cram a bunch of information in to create urgency, which is a tactic. But if you have time and you have your readers, you have people who are just sitting down and they're reading something on a bus, in a lounge chair, whatever. Show, don't tell. Engage us. Engage our imagination. Have us go, wait a minute, pukehead? That's Rick. Rick's at the door? Oh no. Reminds me of a tenet I learned long ago as a trainer. It is to guide the student and not point when teaching. No Straw says, well, what if they figure out where the story is going before it's time and really messes with the narrative? Being able to predict the direction is not necessarily a bad thing. Yeah, because No Straw, in that case, you can develop a growing sense of dread. I can tell you that I know what's going to happen in Lord of the Rings if they don't get the ring to Mount Doom. The villain is going to unleash evil across Middle-earth. I can see that coming from very literally miles away in another land of Mordor, coming to the Shire. That doesn't mean that there's still not tension and adventure, and how are people going to happen something that is apparently so inevitable? What do we do? How are they going to get out of this? Coffee's bad at accents. My dwarfs do not sound Elartsuan like they should. It could just be a regional thing, or maybe they're trying to fit in like the natives of the I was going to say the archipelago, but they're off of that. So there's all sorts of reasons for that. Bandit King UK, it's good to see you. Welcome back to the Hero Zone. It went more into Scottish or Irish or something. I have no idea what I did. Hey, Coffee, what I did before that, I just practiced as best as I could. I looked up Australian pronunciation guides. I listened to Australian people talking in YouTube videos and such. And I knew it was going to be campy, so I just accepted it and leaned into it. And it became, so it became its own sort of unique dwarvish accent of Australian. But yeah, I just looked up, okay, so generally how do Australians pronounce their A's, I's, the vowels? Because that is generally different than how we pronounce our vowels. And I just had to practice a couple things. Practice a couple lines, a couple situations that I knew were going to be brought up. Spoiler paradox, people enjoy stories more when they know what's going to happen, says Bandit King. And so, my show not tell, I could have told you all when you were waking up from the crash. You hear, you hear, and we could even break and go, Australian accents. Or, you hear voices. Instead, I prompted the situation to engage your attention, Coffee. Because, look, I had knocked you all out. It was a really big crash. Even though you were high level, I think it was acceptable that all of you would have been knocked out in that. And I described the scene. I think I had one of you roll con to find out who would be the first one to pick it up. And I described what you heard. I didn't tell you what you heard. Because I knew you were going to put I trusted you to put the context clues together. 2, right? Yeah, no, 5. Were the first words of Dwarvish that you heard. Because I was showing you this was Australian, even if my accent was poor, with 2 right. And then the pun was because 5 of you were laid out on the bridge, not 2. But the dwarf looking through the wreckage only saw 2, while the other one said, yeah, nor 5. Because the other one found 5 of you. So with those 2 lines, we established there were 2 different people with a foreign accent or language to you. I gave you an in-character to out-of-character hint of what to expect for the accent, and to indicate you weren't in Kansas/Shadowhar anymore. And all it took was for me to have one of you come back around and go, 2, right? Yeah, no, 5. And from there, the dwarves of Elartsua continued. I also looked up a lot of Australian slang. Tio says, real question, Maddie, once upon a time, were you an English lit major? No, I was not, Tio. I graduated undergrad with a finance diploma, and then I went on to get an executive master's of business. Question, does anyone else do this? When a song comes on, do you create an entire movie scene around it in your mind? You could say I did that a couple times, especially for that role-playing game, Bandit King. Yes, I have scenes and other inspiration come to mind due to music. I've inflicted jobs upon Coffee Cat to help that come to life. Especially if I have an idea for an animatic for the song. Yep, exactly, Coffee. It happens time and again. Well, I hope that this was... I do hope that this was helpful for you all.